Chapter 17. Troublemakers. Well, I'd been right about the trap. It had done us a fat lot of good, but I'd got us out of there, and Dave had been able to find the cave. We sure as Shinola had lucked out there. So you're telling me your voice in the computer had you move as soon as you found the caves? Yeah, it was really weird. One minute I was talking to the computer, and the next thing the computer was talking to me. Only it wasn't a computer anymore, it was one of the Evernatch, and it was making sense. I was so mad at it that I shut it off, but it overrode the circuits and turned itself right back on again. Told me I was in danger. I told it that if I was in danger, then it was the one to blame. Didn't answer me that, just showed me a picture of this ship shining lights on your pod. My pod? Yeah, I knew it was yours because you were hiding on the other side of this big pile of earth behind a fallen tree. Her words shook me because I remembered that night. I had been hiding behind a fallen tree and a big pile of earth. Su-Lynn didn't seem to notice. It meant that whoever had been talking to us in her campsite was definitely lying. Did you know they've set your camp up as a trap? That was Blossom. I was still too busy thinking about Su-Lynn seeing me on camera, watching the heritage buzz my camp, of Su-Lynn's computer voice mentor looking after her in almost the same way mine had looked after me. Yeah, I was hoping to meet you, but I was afraid. I don't like being out after dark. They come after dark. I never want to be caught by them. Ever. And why is that? Because they eat people, Su-Lynn whispered and looked ready to burst into tears. I asked her the first question that came into my head in a bid to head them off. How do you how'd you get all your stuff down here? I waved a hand at the bed, the computer console, the med box. It worked. Su-Lynn wiped a hand across her eyes and looked around. Then she looked at me. It was the computer guy. Soon as I found the caves and said I'd moved there, bits started letting go of the inside of the pod, and then they folded down real small and floated out the door and over to here. But what about the power? There. And Su-Lynn pointed to a large grey cupboard in the corner. I looked more closely at it and then looked again. Well, it didn't have any doors. I don't suppose it would follow us when we went to find the others. Su-Lynn shook her head. Computer guy said it was a once off thing and he wouldn't be able to do it again, so I had to be sure I was happy. She paused and then she did burst into tears. I was happy. Damn it. I was real happy until I saw the bad ones land and then I was just scared. I don't care if the stuff doesn't follow us. We have to get out of here. When did they land? Last night. The night before? Sulin sniffed. I don't know. Sulin! Blossom snapped and Sulin closed her mouth and stared at the girl. Su-Lynn, Blossom continued, you are one of the strongest people I know. You can't fall apart. Su-Lynn continued to stare at Blossom, and then her chin started to quiver. But instead of bursting into tears again, she took a deep breath. Why not? Because we have to rescue the others, Blossom said, and we need you for that. She looked at me. Who's next, Laurie? Su-Lynn followed her gaze and looked at me. You're in charge? I shrugged and glared at Blossom. Apparently, I said, and even to me I didn't sound happy. I accessed the map inside my head, highlighting the next two pods and marking a course to them. I wondered who Taylor Cobb was. Alicia Reed I already knew, and there was no way in Hades we were going anywhere near her pod. I looked for the pod after that, Saeed Anushra. We could shortcut from Taylor's pod to hers if we didn't need to fetch Alicia, and I wasn't. I wanted some more advice before I went anywhere near that little problem. Do either of you know who Taylor Cobb is? Blossom and Su-Lynn exchanged glances, each of them frowning as they appeared to think about it. I knew it the instant they both decided to lie, and it irritated me immensely. You want to tell me exactly what you've decided you're not going to tell me? I asked, before either of them could open their lying mouths. As I did so, I stood up and backed off to lean on a wall. I have to admit, I was pretty proud of the element of snark I'd managed to inject into my voice, but then I was angry. I dragged my backside halfway across a planet, well, not that far, but a very long way, and these two were going to lie to me? I didn't think so. I glared at them, daring them to come out with whatever they decided to say. Laurie, Blossom began, and I could tell she was going to try and work her way around the truth. No, I shouted. You listen to me. I've been shot at, blown up, chased by a giant centipede, and almost fallen off a cliff. And you two are not going to lie to me. So spill. We picked on him in class, Su-Lynn blurted. I don't think she'd quite meant to say it like that, but it was still a surprise. You what? Why? We picked on him in class because he dressed like a girl? What do you mean, dressed like a girl? You know, lipstick and eyeliner and stuff. So? They both gaped at me. Don't you think that's a bit odd, Laurie? A boy wearing makeup? Not if it makes him feel happy, I said. Honestly, I was sick of people being such babies, so Taylor wore lipstick and eyeliner. I didn't even like the stuff. Did that make me a boy? I cut that rant off before it could get started, but I filed it away for later. I wasn't going to tolerate anyone giving anyone else trouble over who they wanted to be just because it wasn't their bag. And I didn't care if it was a redneck lizard or a stupid schoolgirl. Yeah, there's a reason I'm not one of the cool kids. Too much of a tendency to speak my mind and not smart enough to keep my mouth shut when something gets my goat. What's he like? I asked, hoping for something better. Well, he cries a lot. I glared at them. I don't suppose you'd like to guess why? I asked, all my common sense forgotten and all the sarcasm I could have wished lacing my tones. They both blushed, even Blossom. She might have coffee-coloured skin, but she still blushes, and I can still tell. I decided to let them off the hook again. Well, what's he like when he's not crying? Again they exchanged glances. This time they decided not to lie. Well, we don't know, Blossom said, and looked to Su-Lynn for help. Yeah, he spends a lot of time in the school gardens or in the library, Su-Lynn added. No one knows very much about him. I wonder why the Evernats chose him then. I thought I'd only thought it, but I'd obviously said it out loud because both Blossom and Su-Lynn were staring at me. They looked like I'd just said something surprising. What? I asked. What do you mean the aliens chose us? Blossom demanded. Yeah, Su-Lynn added. Why would they do that? I mean, why choose to dump me on some wild planet? They'd have to have known I'd die in the first week. And did you? I asked. I couldn't help it. I just had to ask. Su-Lynn seemed so sure she'd be dead in a week, and we'd been on the world longer than that already. She blushed again and looked at me, and then I noticed the tears were back in her eyes. No, she said, but why would they do it? I don't know, I said. It's just something Dave came up with, and I think he's right. I came to sit back down on the floor. See, he said I was a troublemaker. I had to stop. Blossom and Su-Lynn started giggling, and soon they were giggling so hard they wouldn't have heard anything I said next. When they'd got most of it out of their systems, I kept going. And he said Blossom was a bit of a hard act, and Su-Lynn is your friend, and so's Dave, who's also not so sweet and innocent, by the way. They were both listening now, their eyes wide with either shock or interest, or maybe a bit of both. So anyway, I don't know much about Alicia, except a lot of people didn't like her, and she's got tremors. I ignored their gasps of horror. I hadn't meant to tell them about Alicia, not yet anyway, but I wanted to get the idea of being chosen out of my system first. And Mitch, yeah, well, I blushed and Blossom snickered. Su-Lynn made a kind of ooh noise, and I stuck out my tongue. And then, since it was probably better off if I just kept going, I started talking again. Mitch is a soldier, and he kept me out of trouble while we were on board the ship. He didn't do a very good job of it, Su-Lynn muttered, and Blossom snickered. Well, he tried, but I'm just too good at getting into it to be held back. That much was true at least. So where does Taylor fit in? Blossom wanted to know. Well, maybe he was good at causing trouble too, and we just didn't know it. Blossom gave a hoot of laughter. What, him? I glared at her until she stopped laughing, but I still didn't like the look of scorn on her face. Yes, him, I snapped. Think about it. He spent a lot of time in the school gardens. What did he do on the ship? I watched as the scorn on her face was replaced by a look of thoughtfulness. I had a theory about bullies. Right now, I hoped it was right. Hydroponics, Su-Lynn said. He spent a lot of time in hydroponics until the aliens stopped him from going there one day. They were real mad at him, too, Su-Lynn said. We never did find out what he'd done. We figured he'd probably deserved whatever he got. I stared at them. I'd gone from thinking they might be okay to not liking them very much at all. I wondered how Dave could have been their friend. But then I remembered that they hadn't been mine back on Earth, and we hadn't known each other very well at all back then. And nobody had seemed to like me much either, or to know much about me. I guess I was just lucky they didn't hate me like they did poor Taylor. Granted, no one had picked on me either, but I hadn't bothered with close friends. Didn't need them. Didn't like the way kids treated each other. Didn't like thinking I was human, too. Well, I'd gotten over the being human thing, and while it might have been nice to be friends with these guys, I couldn't stand the way they treated Taylor, and it looked like their attitude hadn't changed. Besides, what was it I'd read? A leader couldn't have friends, couldn't risk having favorites or being seen having them. It sounded like good advice. Listening to Su-Lynn and Blossom, I realized why. Sometimes you just had to draw a line. If you could do without people liking you, that was a whole lot easier. The thought made me feel a bit sad, and just a bit angry at the Evernatch behind the voice in my computer. Life just wasn't fair. Blossom and Su-Lynn were staring at me, and I realized I hadn't said anything for a while, and neither had they. What? I asked. You just looked really serious, Blossom said. We were wondering what you were thinking, Su-Lynn added. I swallowed the feeling of loneliness and unfairness and sadness and gave them both my most serious look. I think you both owe Taylor an apology, I said. No way, Blossom blurted out. He's gay. Su-Lynn opened her mouth to join in, and I didn't give her the chance. To be honest, I was sick of the pair of them. Enough! I shouted, and they both stopped. I didn't need to try to look stern now. I was just angry. You're no better than the Heritage. They hunt us because humans can't possibly be as good as Evernatch because all we're good for is food, like we're animals because we're different. And you make fun of Taylor because he wants to be a girl. Well, get over yourselves. Haven't you ever heard of guys, and girls too, who feel like they've been born into the wrong body? How would you like it if you suddenly turned into boys? You got chosen because you were troublemakers, and so did I, and Mitch, and probably Alicia too. You ever stop to think that whatever Taylor did to get himself kicked out of the hydroponics section might have been something he did to try and get us all back home? Well, did you? Bet that's the first thing you would have thought of it if it had been Mitch or me. I stopped. Once again, the thought of Mitch made me feel like crying. I wanted to scream at the two of them some more, and then I wanted to storm out of the cave and slam the door behind me. Only there wasn't a door, and knowing my luck, the Heritage would have come back to check how their trap had worked, and I'd storm right into them. Which reminded me, there wasn't a door, and I'd just been screaming my head off because I was so mad. Oops. Blossom and Su-Lynn were staring at me again, and I almost apologized for what I'd said, except that Su-Lynn gave a sudden hiccuping sob and buried her face in her hands. Blossom moved over to her and wrapped an arm around her shoulders. She was glaring at me, but seemed to be close to tears herself. I suppose I should have felt good about making them both feel bad about the way they'd behaved, but I didn't. I felt terrible, and it was because I'd made them feel bad, and because they'd probably hate me forever, and because I had to tell them what to do and get them to do it. I sat down against the wall furthest from the pair of them and closed my eyes. What had I done? I thought over what I'd said. How could I have said that? I wondered. Because it was right. And since when did that ever make it okay to say? And if someone had to say it, why on earth did that someone have to be me? Since we have to get to Taylor in the morning, and I really hope the Heritage haven't found him first. I had the feeling we were going to be needing his gardening skills if we were going to live long enough for the protectors to come.